Hello! How are we all? Welcome to... I need to look up what number it is. It's been so long. It is episode... 23? 25, 26, 28. It's one of the 20s. It is episode 26 of the Supabase Happy Hour, which is very exciting. We have now... Well, yeah, I guess 26 is that milestone where we've now been running the happy hour almost every week for 6 months now. So almost half a year. That's awesome. So welcome everyone in the chat who's joining us from all over the world. Let us know where you are joining us from and what time it is where you are. I am slightly not illuminated today because, as always, the tech problems were many right before going into the stream. So one of my lights is not on, but I feel like it sets the mood nicely. And it kind of goes with this cold that I'm obviously fighting at the moment, and this nice radio voice that I have here. And so maybe we'll just keep it real calm for the happy hour this week. But we're not calm this week. We're very excited. We're very happy because Next.js 13 has been launched and has now been marked as stable, I think, as of yesterday, which is very exciting. And so, yeah, we're going to go through some cool data fetching and caching stuff, looking at how we use Next.js 13 with Supabase. And so, yeah, I, like everyone else, am quite new to Next.js 13, so expect some questionable explanations on things, and we'll have fun with it. Dave is saying hello from Germany. It's 1 a.m. and so I should go to bed. You absolutely should go to bed, just like Cookify Media, who's joining us from Sweden, where it's also 1 a.m. So yeah, that's wild. 1 a.m. is not a happy... Well, I guess maybe it is a super happy time, depending on whether you like still being awake at 1 a.m. I feel like if I was still awake at 1 a.m., it would not be a happy time. And this is the happy hour, so we want it to be the happiest moment for you that it possibly can be. Supership is joining us from the Super Squad. Supership, I believe, has recently launched a new Fireship-like YouTube channel based around Supabase. So very cool to see you here. Thank you for joining us. And it's 5 p.m. in Arizona for Supership. So not too unreasonable at all. That is probably the most happy hour we're going to get here. It's also 5 p.m. in Vancouver. So for me, it is 11 a.m. On Friday morning. So for a lot of people that are joining me from everyone who's mentioned something so far is either Thursday afternoon or like technically Friday morning, but like 1 a.m. Friday morning, which isn't really Friday yet. Cool. So there has been all kinds of exciting things happening in Supabase land. And yes, Curtis is shouting out that I'm living in the future. And so I can tell you everything that's going to happen while you're asleep. When you wake up, you will know it as well. I'm not actually allowed to tell you. It's the rules of Australia that I'm not actually allowed to tell you what happens in the future. But oh no, I'm not even the most future person here. Jonathan. I don't have my buddies Tyler and Alistair here to laugh when I make the same jokes over and over again and make fun of me for doing so. But if you do get confused as to which Jonathan it is, whether it's me, Jonathan, or Jonathan in the chats, you got to look at that second last character. The A gives it away. Jonathan versus Jonathan. Um, and yeah, Jonathan is coming to us from New Zealand, which is even more future than Australia. So Jonathan is the most future so far. And yes, representing that elbow cough. Yeah. Sorry if my voice sounds gross. I promise I'm not contagious through the microphone. So you will be all right. What has been happening in the world of Supabase? Let me share my screen. If I can share my screen. The problem with not doing this for like just a couple of weeks is just nothing works anymore. Everything is different, especially when you change browsers and you're now using Arc, like the cool kids, instead of Firefox, which is what I usually use. Everything's different. You have to give everything permissions again. And so we'll see whether this lets me do it. And it does. No, does it? Lost permission to capture the screen. Okay. All right. All right. All right. As annoying as this is, I think we'll be back in a second. Let's do it. Here we go. Starting off well. The tech problems have eaten all the way into actually needing to quit and reopen my browser. Back in a second. Bye. There we go. This is the problem with being at the forefront of technology and using all the hot new cool tools. Now, it has nothing to do with that. This is just because I haven't used Arc with StreamYard yet. But yeah, I'm back. And now I should be able to present and share my screen. I hope. Boom! We did it. Now that I don't have those other two to try and fit on the screen as well, I can try out some of these different options. No, I reckon this is still the best. So, yeah, Supabase. That is not what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you that we have now officially launched the very alpha or beta maybe version of the Supabase auth helpers. And so I recommend you go and check out our docs. If you go to the link in the description or /docs/guides/auth helpers/remix, you will find these awesome auth helpers that makes working with a server in Remix much, much, much more simple. And so if you joined us for the building a SaaS or getting sassy with Stripe series, we did quite a lot of plumbing ourselves to set up a cookie that could be read on the server to basically enforce RLS with Supabase. You don't have to do that if you install this library. So I recommend you check out the very simple steps to get up and running. And we will actually, I think, be going through an example of this next week. And so Thor and I have been working pretty closely with this. And so yeah, I thought it'd be good to go through showing you how to actually get up and running with a Remix app using the auth helpers. So stay tuned for that next week. And if you can't wait until next week because that's just too exciting and you need to get started right now, you can go and check out the docs, and it very clearly explains what you need to do to get started. Matthew is joining us from Nigeria. That's awesome and super ready for this. What time is it in Nigeria at the moment? And Jonathan, sorry if that annoys you, me doing the hard A on Jonathan, but it's the only way that they can tell us apart. So it's also a rule that we can't tell the Aussies what's going to happen, by the way. Yeah, so New Zealand is not allowed to tell us. And so since we have to wait for it to actually happen, we're not allowed to tell the rest of the world either. It's this little cascading secret that we have on this side of the world that we can't tell you what's going to happen in the future. Matthew is saying it's 1 a.m. in Nigeria. So we've got a bunch of people joining us from 1 a.m. time zone, which is very exciting. Supership needs to drop off for family time, which is a good idea. Go and spend time with the family. Go and have dinner. Go and get the little ones ready for bed if there are little ones. I can very much empathize with that. And so hoping for another video dropping tomorrow morning. Awesome. So yes, check out the Supership channel. Go and subscribe to Supership on YouTube and check out all of the awesome content that's coming out. Some awesome content coming out tomorrow morning, which is relative. I don't know whether that means tomorrow morning your time. I'm assuming that means tomorrow morning US time. So I have a feeling Supership might be doing some family time and then maybe jumping back into the work time and editing the last of a video that's going live tomorrow. So Supabase auth helpers, they are sick. If you want to check them out, we have Next.js ones, we have SvelteKit ones, and we have Remix ones that have been built by the DevRel team at Supabase and then some awesome people in the community that have been helping us out. So I recommend you check those out. The other thing that's coming, I probably shouldn't be like, all these remix announcements while we're focusing on Next.js 13, but I will be emceeing or co-emceeing Remix Conf Europe. And so I recommend you go and get a ticket for that. Reserve your spot. And so, myself, Paul, Brittany Postma, and Simon will be, all co-emceeing Remix Conf Europe. So I think myself and Simon will kind of be like co-emceeing one track. If you haven't checked out the Navbar podcast, that's a podcast that Simon and I run together. And it's going to be almost as fun as an episode of the Navbar. And so I recommend you come and hang out with us during that React Conf Europe track. So it's going to be fun. Second track, it's where it's at. And then I will also be running a workshop. So if you are excited about building a real-time app with Remix and Supabase, I believe if you get a ticket to Remix Conf Europe, then all of these workshops are free, I believe. They're included in the ticket. Come and hang out with me and learn how to build with Remix and Supabase. And we will definitely be using those brand new Remix auth helpers to get us some server-side goodies. The other thing that has just been going off and awesome is actually two things. There is the Supabase YouTube channel, which if you are not subscribed yet, I highly recommend you go and check out youtube.com/c/Supabase, which I'm pretty sure you can now go to /@Supabase. Yeah, we've got those fresh new handles for YouTube, which is very cool. But you can also just go to, whoop, don't do that. You can also just go to /Supabase. And so, much simpler to get to people. So you should go to youtube.com/Supabase and check out all of the awesome, cool videos that have been going live. There's been a whole bunch of awesome Supabase tips videos. We've also had lots of cool auth helpery authentication stuff that Thor put together using the Next.js auth helpers. There's just been a whole bunch of awesome content, and there will be a whole bunch more awesome content coming very soon. If you are a fan of Supabase, you probably know that we like to make big deals about things and put together a big party called Launch Week, where we launch new features each day of the week. And so there'll be lots of content coming for that. And I think a whole bunch of Supabase tips videos coming throughout December. So come and subscribe to the channel. And the other awesome thing you should check out is the Supabase blog, which has been going nuts recently. We have had a whole bunch of awesome content, obviously written by people inside Supabase. But also we have some content written by some people outside Supabase, which is very, very cool. And so, you'll see that we have a whole bunch of authors. This used to pretty much just be like, Ant and Koppel when they had time, being the CEO and CTO, where they're getting less and less time putting together articles. And now we've got a huge range of people writing very technical articles for the Supabase blog. So I highly recommend you go and check that out as well. All right. Emmanuel is joining us from Istanbul, Turkey. Awesome. It's 3 a.m. here in Istanbul. I don't know why you're still awake and clicking on YouTube live links to watch tech streams, but I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining me. All right. So what I'm going to do is build a Next.js 13 app from scratch. And what I need you to do is help me out if I get stuck. And I don't have my buddies here to point out when I'm doing silly things. So please yell loudly in the chat if I do silly things, especially if one of those silly things is like, my mic being muted or not being able to see the shared screen or something like that. Very exciting. Lee Robinson is joining us. What time is it for you where you are in the world? This is head of DevRel at Vercel, who obviously make Next.js. Very exciting times with Next.js 13 coming out. We're going to be spending lots of time with it today. And great to have you in the chat because now you can answer every question that I have. And it's like I have a live WebSocket connection to support. So thank you for joining us. I'm assuming you are in San Fran at the moment. So it's probably 5 p.m., 8 p.m., one of those two. And Lee is happy to answer our questions, which is very exciting. Very happy to have you here. And it is 8:15 in New Jersey for BK Method. So that is awesome. All right. So what we're talking about today, if you have been somehow living under a rock, Next.js 13 got announced as part of Remix Conf 2022, which happened last week. I believe it was last week. And with this came a whole bunch of really, really exciting things. So we have a new app directory, which is still in beta. So Next.js 13 is now stable. And yeah, you can use all of the cool stuff. But this new app directory is still in beta. So the app directory is basically a way to incrementally move towards the future of React. And so how Next.js can align with the React team on things like server components and suspense and all of the things. And they have built some amazingly convenient, awesome APIs to make it super easy to use things like suspense and async React server components, which is definitely something we'll be looking at in this stream. Layouts is also a huge one. So Next.js now supports nested layouts. And so we might have a quick look at that, but probably won't spend too much time on that. Most of what we'll look at is the React server component side of things. And yeah, all the cool new data fetching and caching things that have been announced and exist within this app directory. But yeah, a lot of what we're going to go through today is still in beta. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to start off creating a brand new, completely from scratch application, a new Next.js 13 app. And we're going to start off by kind of, I guess, like refreshing or going over how you currently fetch data in a Next.js application. So using the pages directory. And the reason that I want to do this is because the pages directory isn't actually deprecated. And so at the moment, it's still, there's some stuff that you can do in the app directory, but it being beta, there are a couple of gotchas and a couple of things that, that you still need the pages directory, and you might still need the pages directory forever. And so this app directory is kind of a way that we can test out these new things. But you can still do everything in a pages directory in Next.js 13. It just gives you new cool options of things that you can play with. So I think it's time to get started. Emmanuel is saying happy to have Lee around. BK is saying hi, Lee. Super excited about Next.js 13. Nervous about the talk that app directory is really alpha and not beta. I've been playing with it, and it's awesome. It's I think the cool thing about it is with Next.js obviously working so closely with the React team and like really aligning with the direction that React is heading, and making sure that's a big part of Next.js 13. It means that they can like really like launch things that are super new ideas into this beta app folder. But as I said before, like everything in the page, like the pages directory is not deprecated. So while the app directory does give you access to some new things that might be super alpha or super beta, you can always just keep doing things in the pages directory. And I think that gives you a really awesome migration path from slowly moving things across as they are supported. But yeah, it's fun being at the forefront of things. It's fun like trying things out and having things break, and being a part of the discussion as to how to improve the DX all around. So I think it's very exciting. Emmanuel is saying, very nervous too. I'm about to start a new project and unsure if I should start using the Next.js 13. So yes, well, how about I let Lee answer. If you're starting a new project you want to put into production, I would use pages directory, unless it's like a small personal project or something. So yes, using the pages directory doesn't mean that you can't use Next.js 13. There's like the new app directory is like it's being launched as part of Next.js 13. It's being launched into beta, but it doesn't mean that you can't use the pages directory. You can't use any of the other Next.js 13 stuff. You can still use Next.js 13, migrate, or yeah, you can upgrade your project from Next.js 12 to Next.js 13, and you can add an app directory, but you don't need to change. There are a couple of breaking changes, but you don't need to change all of your data fetching logic to use async server components or anything like that. You don't need to move anything across to the app directory, but you can, which is what is awesome about Next.js 13 and just overall the attitude from Vercel of creating this really incremental path, this incremental upgrade path where they can launch all this cool stuff and be like, right at the forefront of like testing out new ideas and basically like being a driving force for like what the direction of React is going to be in the future, but not just breaking everything and not giving you two completely separate two completely separate versions of Next.js that you either need to use Next.js 12 to use the pages directory or Next.js 13 to use the app directory. Everything is still supported, and yeah, Lee says pages isn't going anywhere too, so don't feel like it's going to go away. So yeah, at the moment, very much very much just new stuff that's available, not taking away any of the old stuff. And the old stuff might just be the best way to do certain things, and the new stuff might be the best way to do other things. So, have you tried TurboPack yet? Yes, in that I have created a new Next.js 13 application, and I assume it's running under the hood. It seems very, very fast. So I'm gonna just state yes. But we should probably get started with this and jump into it. So most of UI libraries isn't supported in Next.js 13. So once again, yeah, the UI libraries are supported in Next.js 13, just maybe not in the app directory. But in the pages directory, you can still keep using everything, and then as things that you're using are supporting more and more, you can migrate them across. Yeah. So yeah, I am worried about foot guns and stability at the moment because we don't know what the standard right way to do things are yet. Speaking of Next.js 13. So yeah, it is introducing lots of cool ideas, and but you can still just use Next.js 13, use the pages directory, launch it back into production. That is considered stable, and so that should all be fine. It should be safe to upgrade to Next.js 13. But just if you want to start incrementally moving things across to the app directory, then you can. All right. Lee Robinson, when will TurboPack support Tailwind CSS? Any idea? Yeah, I think you can still run. I think it's similar to Remix. You need to like run a second process, but you can still use Tailwind, I believe, with Next.js 13 and the pages directory. It just might, you might need to run like a concurrently package or something like that to run the two, just to like compile the Tailwind CSS that you need. But Lee says soon, working on it. Sorry that this has become just a a support hangout for Lee. So I will try and field more questions. He can field them in the chat. But let's get started with Next.js 13. So we can upgrade by running this, or if we want to start fresh, we can click through to the other thing that I wanted to shout out is that there is, so we have the Next.js docs, obviously. So these are just the regular docs. They talk about some Next.js 13 things, but all of the data fetching stuff is around using those old methods for data fetching and caching. So get server-side props, get static props, etc., which I think we'll go through in this stream in a second. But I think there are some mentions of Next.js 13 throughout and the app directory. But if you want to go really deep on all of the new cool things, these new beta docs have been launched, which are I think going to be the fully redesigned new version of the docs once everything has been ported across. But for right now, they are in beta and talk through all of the kind of like ideologies behind Next.js 13, the app directory, React server components, all of those things. And I have just been finding it awesome reading through all of this stuff, like even just outside of trying to find out like how I actually like build an application. I've just been finding it really interesting to just learn about like, you know, the ideology behind React server components. And yeah, there's lots of like information, not just like copy and paste code snippets and commands, but also lots of justification for all of the things, which is very cool. All right, so we're going to start off by creating a new Next.js app. So we're going to use create next app, and we're going to do at latest and setting this -- experimental app flag. So I believe if you don't do this, like if you're upgrading, then you can check out the blog for what you need to actually do. So you need to install all of these different packages. You probably need to create the app directory, and I think you need to set if you want to use the app directory, I think you need to set it in the config to being, oh yeah, sorry, here's the manual installation. So you install those packages. This will probably be the same as Next.js 12, but in the next config, you need to set this experimental app directory to true if you want to use the app directory and all of the new hotness. So let's start off by creating a brand new Next.js application. And this is on the wrong window. We will get there. This one over here. All right. So let's change into my Supabase directory, not the auth helpers. Let's go into examples, and then let's say Happy Hour Next 13. So yeah, npx create next app. So this is using the create next app package, installing the latest version of that, and then we're setting experimental app, where we're passing in that flag so that it knows that we want to use all of the new experimental things. And I'm just calling the project Happy Hour Next 13. All right, and we are going to use TypeScript. Oh god, Alistair's not here to write my types for me. We'll have to get him in the chat and he can just dump out all of the types that I need to do. Would you like to use ESLint with this project? The default is no, so I don't know if that's because some of the things will give unnecessary errors while all of these rules and things are being updated. But I'm just going to say yes. And we are creating a new Next.js application. So Musa is saying, also, I'm planning to use Supabase as my main database and auth. What do you think about I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I don't know if you're asking me or Lee. It makes more sense for you to ask Lee because I think my answer is going to be, of course, use it. That's what we're here for. But if you mean specifically to use it with Next.js 13, again, well, yeah, that's what we'll be going through in the stream today. So you can make your own call about whether you would like to use Supabase as your main database and auth. But I think you'll see that it works pretty well. Lee is saying that the beta docs for the app directory are rewritten from scratch. It's been a process. Yeah, I can't imagine how much work that would be, and we appreciate it, and I think they're going to be amazing because just from reading through it at the moment, like it's like taking a free course on like what the future of React is. And someone called me out when I tweeted about this, saying that like shouldn't a framework always be a course on how to use the tool? But that's what I mean, is it's not just using the tool, like it's using the underlying tool, like it's using React. It's talking about some of the ideologies behind like the direction that React is heading. But it's also just like, I think generally the direction that the web is heading. Like a lot of these things exist in SvelteKit as well. A lot of these things exist in Remix, which I guess is another meta framework. I haven't been on top of the Angular side of things to see what's going on there, but I think moving a lot of things to the server, and I think things like streaming and having server components, whatever that means in the framework that you're talking about, I think all of those ideas are pretty consistent across the main frameworks at the moment. And Lee endorsing Supabase. Supabase is great. Would recommend. You'll see that quote on the website later today. We'll take a screenshot of this one and put Lee's approval on the Supabase website. Dark mode is sweet. Yeah, I guess that's referring to the awesome dark mode on the docks, which looks very nice, as opposed to this blinding white light. So yes, especially for those people that it's 1 a.m. in the morning for, I bet dark mode is the preferred option there. I'm trying to hide my API key. Should I create a proxy using Supabase? Depends which API key you're referring to. One of the cool things about React server components is that they run on the server. So if you have secret keys that you don't want to expose to the client, then by default, everything in the app directory is a server component. And one of the recommended ways to enforce that it only runs on the server and definitely doesn't leak through to the client is using I believe it's called the server-side package, but we'll definitely look at using that. Maybe server-side only, server-only, I think it is. And that will enforce that this code will only ever run on the server. And so that would be the best way to hide your API keys. So you don't need to create a proxy through something else. But yeah, we'll look at all this in a second. Is there any way to DM you, Lee Robertson? I'd say if his DMs are not open on Twitter, that's probably because it would probably be an overwhelming amount of requests that would just, fall through the cracks and not go to the correct support people. So you get the opportunity to ask him live on the happy hour. So join us every week on the happy hour for a direct line to Lee Robinson and all of your support requests answered. Not really. All right. I'm waiting to see how props can be passed to server components. A lot of stuff changed, but I love Next.js 13. Yeah, it will be exciting just to see how these new patterns affect the way that we write code. And yeah, I think anytime there's any kind of shift in the way that we are doing data fetching or any kind of structure of our applications, it always brings with it really new, exciting patterns that people develop to do things in this new world. So I am also very excited to see that. What's the max limits of per connections to Supabase? BK is saying it is 100 connection pool. So yeah, we do connection pooling at Supabase or through the Postgres REST, which is a package that we use to do all the cool stuff and stitch everything together around this Postgres database in Supabase land. And so yeah, BK method saying that I believe it's 100 connection pool. It is a good question and something that I should go and find out. I'm not sure of the specific amount of connections, but having connection pooling and sharing all of those connections around makes it an excellent option when you're in the serverless world and you've got a lot of short-lived functions that are quickly connecting to a database, doing a query, and then like shutting down. It's very different to the traditional world of databases where your server had like a stable, constant connection to the database. It's very different to that world. And so having connection pooling or any kind of something that shares around those connections and isn't just creating a whole new connection, taking up one of those connections to your database every single time a serverless function gets executed, is very important in the web development world that we're living in currently. All right, enough stalling. So you'll see that this probably looks pretty familiar if you are if you've been working with Next.js previously. So we still have the pages directory, and in there we've got an API folder with hello.ts. So this would be a serverless function that's being deployed as an API route. And then we have this magical app directory here, which has these new files with maybe slightly different names to what you're used to. And so the two main things are layout. And so this is something that wraps around your component. And then wherever the children are rendered, will render the page. And this layout component will also wrap around every like um, sub route, what am I trying to say? Any nested route that's within this folder, this layout will wrap around. And so you can think of this as kind of like your underscore app.js or underscore app.ts file in Next.js 12. But now we just have this nice React component, or I guess it's not just a React component because we have our HTML and our head and our body. But yeah, this is kind of the top level rootmost part of our application. And so this is where we would want to put any logic that we share around our components. And then our page is where we actually do the like styled JSX that we want to render out to our page. And so this layout wraps around anything that's in here, and then our page kind of replaces our component that was inside the pages folder. So we still can have like about.tsx, so that's outside that API folder, but we can still have this, and we can say export default function uh, about. And this one we can just let GitHub Copilot help us out, and we're just rendering out about. And so we now have this about.tsx. So if we run our application, just going to move this one over here. And if we say npm run dev, so all of this is exactly the same as anytime you've been working with Next.js. And then we come across to our browser and we go to localhost over port 3000, you'll see this very familiar welcome to Next.js 13 page. Yeah, and so this is rendering it's kind of a combination of our layout, which wraps around all of this stuff. So if I was to put like a hello up here, we would see when we refresh that hello is there. And actually something that I haven't checked, which I'm assuming is not the case. So I'm assuming when we go to our new route that hello will not be there, because that's in the app directory, and the pages directory, I suspect, is kept separate. Let's have a look. About. Yes. Okay. So that's gone. So this layout component wraps everything up here, which means that let's see. Let's see if we still have an underscore app.tsx. Actually, I don't remember the syntax for that, but that would be something interesting to check out, is whether you still have an underscore app.tsx to wrap around anything in the pages directory. But yeah, as you can see, we can have both pages with our pages components, and then we can have app using all of that new stuff like nested layouts, React server components, all of that. So why don't we quickly start by setting up a Supabase client in the way that we would have set it up previously, just so we can have a look at how all of this worked in the previous world, and then look at refactoring it across to the new world. So if we come across to here, this install at Supabase/Supabase.js. And actually, while that's installing, we should go and create a Supabase instance. So I'm going to go to app.supabase.com. I'm going to create a new project under our Happy Hour organization. This one is going to be Happy Next 13. I'm going to generate a new password, and I'm going to copy that and go and put that off screen. And then I'm going to choose a region that's close to me. So I'm going to choose Sydney, and this one's going to be on the free plan. And so, yeah, this will create a Next.js, sorry, not a Next.js. This will create a Supabase project that we can connect to with our Next.js client. So This is now installed at Supabase/Supabase.js. So I'm going to run our development server again. And then the way that we are going to create a Supabase client is we're going to create a new utils folder, which is going to be outside of all of this stuff. And we're going to call it supabase.ts. And I did not put it outside. So I'm going to move that outside. So if I collapse all of these, we've got our app, we've got our pages, and then we've got utilities at that same like root level, just so we can use it across pages and app. In here, we have our supabase.ts file. And so we're going to import the create client package from Supabase at Supabase/Supabase.js, which if you're ever forgetting what to do, I don't know if you'll actually be able to hear this. I've created a terminal thing.
npm install at supabase/supabase-js.
So anytime I forget, I just remember all I have to type is
npm install at supabase/supabase-js.
I hope you can actually hear that. I'm betting you can't, but basically my computer reads out what I need to do, which is type npm install at supabase/supabase-js. That is for a very silly song, which you will be hearing soon, coming soon to a launch week near you, perhaps. A little sneak preview. But here we are creating a client. And so we can export default function where we call create client. Whoops, not create. Where we call create client from our Supabase.js package. And then, yeah, it's going to nicely pre-fill all of this for me. So we're going to use our process.m.next_public_Supabase URL and our Supabase key. And so I need to create those. And this will probably say that it doesn't exist. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to come out here and out in our root directory again, we're going to create a .env.local file. And we're going to put our next_public_Supabase URL here. And, well, I'll copy this just so that we definitely don't make a silly typo. Actually, instead of Supabase key, I'm going to make this Supabase a non-key, so we're a little bit more clear about which environment variable we're using. If you're not super familiar with Supabase, then we have different API keys that you can use when you're basically doing things based on like a signed in user, or basically as the default, you should always use Supabase or non-key. And then this is something that adheres to RLS, or row level security, which is something that we encourage as a way to do authorization in Supabase. But you can also use the service key to connect to your client. And so if you used your service key, that would basically bypass everything and give you very destructive rights to the database. And so you definitely would never prepend the service role key with next_public_, because this will be exposed to the client or to the browser. And so, best to use your Supabase a non-key. So where do you find that? Well, over here in our Next.js, our Happy Next 13 application, our Supabase project, if we come down to settings and then go to API, we'll see the URL here. So we can copy that one, and that will be our URL. And then our non-key, this one is a public key. But we recommend that you turn on RLS for any tables before you, expose it to the client. And that's just so that people can't do things that you don't explicitly allow them to do. But that's another episode, another video for another episode. If you check out the Supabase channel, there is an awesome RLS video that I put together that goes through RLS in much more detail. But for now, we're going to copy that public value and just remember that RLS is your friend. So if you are exposing that to the browser, then you probably want your tables to have RLS on. We should now have those values. And I believe as part of Next.js 13, or maybe one of the Next.js 12 point releases, you don't even need to restart your server, and it will just magically read in these new environment variables. So this is now just telling us that this might not exist. So we can say, well, we've created this file, so we know that these are going to exist. So bang, go away. Cool. So we are calling create client, which gives us back a Supabase client. So now let's bring that in our pages directory. So rather than having an about page, let's have a all right, this is where I need help from the chat. What should we build? I don't just want to build the to-do app. I could build just the blog. But what's a good example of something? Let's not go like SaaS, fully launched into production SaaS, or anything like that. But if you have a funny idea for an app that we could build, chuck it in the chat, and I will quickly review some of the comments. We've got a whole bunch of people in the chat, which is very exciting. We have yeah, I'm asking because I generally use MongoDB and it has a max limit of 500 connections, which gets exhausted pretty fast. Yeah, I don't have a whole bunch of experience with like lots of connections, but I would imagine that the way that Supabase shares around the 100 connections would mean that it wouldn't get eaten up by serverless functions just quickly shutting down. But yeah, I can find out more about that and mention it on a future happy hour episode, or it will be in the show notes, the magical show notes. It will always be there. So what is the right pattern to use Supabase with short-lived serverless functions? Exactly this way that we're about to do it. And that's the benefit of using something like Supabase JS, is that it behind the scenes is making a fetch request to a REST API that we manage for you, which is your Postgres API. And so that does all of the magic connection pooling stuff behind the scenes and manages all of those connections to your database. So you can just make like endless requests, serverless requests to that API, because it's basically like a serverless API that sits in front of your Postgres database. And so you don't need to worry about any of that connection pooling stuff. You don't need to think about it because that's all being managed for you by Postgres. And so you can just, send lots of short-lived serverless requests from Supabase JS, which we're about to use, and it will all magically get handled behind the scenes. Emmanuel is saying, I think Supabase is great. I think Supabase is great as well. So that's good. You should use connection pooling. You can see those settings in your project database, so we can go and have a look at that. So under project settings and database, we can see connection pooling. So this one is enabled. And so, yeah, this just automatically gets used with when we're using Supabase JS. But if you do want to manage the connection directly yourself, if you were using something like Prisma or something to actually connect to your database in front of, like instead of using Supabase JS, then just make sure that you copy this full, we can't see it off screen there, but if I bring this across to here, this going over port 6543 uses connection pooling, I believe, instead of, I forget what the other one is, but the other port that is the default port for Postgres. And then, yeah, again, all of that stuff handled by Supabase. So what I mean by my question is Supabase stable for production? Yeah, so technically Supabase is still I believe still technically beta, but there is a whole bunch of companies that have lots of Supabase in production, and I think it is very stable. And maybe there will be an announcement soon on that. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I don't think it would have any problem handling an app with 5,000 users. That would, be minuscule to the amount of scalability that you get with a relational database like Postgres. Goodbye_app. I want to see how we can wrap providers. I had some issues with that, so I'm excited to see the implementation. Yeah, cool. We might not get to that in this stream because I've already waffled on for almost an hour. But yes. I believe you would make a layout component that wraps around the pages that you want to expose those providers to. But yeah, I believe I'm not sure if it's been updated yet, but if you check out the Supabase auth helpers for Next.js, yeah, I don't think it's been updated to show an example yet, but there will be a way to show how to use those providers with the app directory and get all of your Supabase sessions stuff passed through. Curious if we should keep API keys for Supabase as next_public, given that we have control the RSL. I think that's RLS. So yeah, so right now, like on this stream, I probably shouldn't be exposing my my next_public_ because I haven't yet enabled RLS. So for people that aren't familiar with RLS, if you have a look at our table, if I create something, have we got a good example of what we should build yet? Real-time chat. Something real-time. We probably won't get to playing with real-time stuff in this one, but actually, maybe in a couple of weeks I'll do a showing off all the new real-time stuff because there's lots of fun new real-time stuff in Supabase. So MVC, some kind, simulate K of users and see how it will go. All right. How about should we just go with a to-do app? Let's just do what's a thing in the world? Parks. Lovely parks that exist that you could go and visit. And a park has a title, which can be of type text. And we always want the park to have a title. We always want it to have a created at. So I'm just turning off is nullable, which means that it always has to have one of these values. And the ID, I am going to make this of type UUID, just because I like the look of it more. The default value is going to be calling this function. So this will give us a new UUID, and it is going to be the primary key. Cool. And then if I click save, this is going to create this table, and you'll see that enable row level security is ticked. And so this is going to enable row level security. So the benefit of using the anon key, and the reason that it's safe to expose, is that it doesn't it does adhere to RLS, and it doesn't let you do crazy things like destroy tables, drop tables, and things like that. So the permissions that are on the anon user mean that you can only basically like insert, update, and delete data in tables. So the thing that you don't want is to create a table and then not have RLS enabled and expose your anon key. But for because we didn't have any tables, you can't actually do anything. But now that we have a table, if we have RLS enabled, then we are locking down all of those things. So we're going too deep on RLS. Every single time we do a stream, we end up talking too much about RLS. But row level security is how you do authorization in Supabase, or how we encourage. Obviously, you can do it in any way you want. But the way that we recommend is using RLS policies. So these are security policies that are written in the database, and they basically allow or deny access to different bits of data. And so when you turn on RLS, it basically just blanket denies everything. So when RLS is on, we cannot select, update, insert, or delete anything in our database. And so if we want to enable any of those actions, then we need to create a new policy. And so I could create a policy to say parks parks can be read by anyone, and make this a select policy. So anyone can view, can select those parks, and then I'm just going to return true. And so this basically, this using part, we can give it an expression that evaluates to either true or false. So one thing we would do in a real app is we might say like auth.uid, which is a function that gives us the currently logged in user in Supabase. We could check that that equals the user ID column of our parks, for example, and then a user would only be able to select their own parks. But in this example application, we're just going to return true. So we're just enabling read-only access to this. So at this point, we now have read-only access. So anyone can read any of the rows in here, but they can't change anything. They can't insert, they can't update, they can't delete. And so that's why it is safe to expose this in our as next underscore public underscore, because this is a big JWT token, which gets passed across with any request to Supabase. That doesn't allow you to do anything destructive to the database unless you create a policy that allows you to actually do that. So hopefully that cleared that up. That was a long answer. I would say it is production ready. You can upgrade your database in Supabase if it isn't meeting your needs. Yes, you can go up onto the paid plan if you need any of those additional things. And also because Supabase is just a collection of convenience tools wrapping around a Postgres database, you could dump that database and go and move it across to any Postgres instance. So if you did find that you were hitting limitations, then it is very portable as well. But you won't, because Supabase is awesome. All right. So let's see. Yeah, lots of saying build something real time. So in a couple of weeks, I'll do something real timey, real time with foreign tables. Yeah, we can go through all of that in a couple of weeks. Jason is saying morning. Jason is awesome and has been helping out a lot with the happy hour streams and doing lots of submitting lots of PRs for styling our terribly styled applications. So hey Jason, welcome to the stream. What do you think about using Prisma with Supabase? Yeah, I think this is awesome if you like the ORM side of Prisma. The only thing that you miss out on is Prisma doesn't have the ability to connect to different schemas. And it doesn't pass across those additional headers like the JWT token and things that you need to kind of plumb through all of that authentication information into Supabase. So using Prisma with Supabase is awesome because then Supabase can host your database. You can add, like, it means you can write your Postgres functions and Postgres triggers and have all of this automation stuff happening in the database. And you can do that in Supabase land. It's just you miss out on that part that kind of glues the whole ecosystem of Supabase together, where you don't have that auth piece. But that means that you can just write your authorization policies in like a serverless function or something like that. It just means that you need like a middle layer. Like with Supabase, you can connect directly from the client browser directly to your Supabase instance. Whereas if you use something like Prisma, you would need to probably go through like some kind of server-side node-y thing to proxy that request. But yeah, awesome option to use with Supabase. Thanks, Supabase is awesome, and then there is no limit to requests, only that I suck at building SQL schemas. Do I need to go learn SQL to enjoy the benefits? I think you can get away with a lot without needing to know that much SQL, and I think that's the benefit of like the Supabase dashboard. Like what I did just then, a second ago, was like quickly create a table and then quickly go and enable RLS. Like I don't need to know any SQL to do that. All I'm saying, like, this is very similar to like, you know, anytime you're doing any kind of typing stuff in like GraphQL or MongoDB, creating models or anything like that. I was just basically saying, I want this column and I want it to have this data type. So a column for my ID, that's UUID, a column for my title, which is text. So it kind of like, I think what Supabase tries to do is make it easy to work with Postgres without hiding it away and seeming like Postgres is this big scary thing. So for example, when we created our policy, I probably rushed through that a little bit, but with our when I created a policy, the last step of this, if I just create some kind of something that returns true again, the last step of this, when I click review, is it actually shows you what the SQL that you're generating is. So all Supabase is doing is just giving you these nice form fields, and then it's just putting those form fields into the syntax of SQL or Postgres. And so we try not to like abstract everything that's happening in the database away from you. Like, we give you direct access to your database. You can use the connection string to just connect to your Postgres database directly. We try to kind of like teach SQL and teach Postgres as much as we can, rather than just being a tool where you don't need to worry about SQL. But you also don't really need to worry about SQL for the most part. Like, there are some things where you might need to create a Postgres function to be able to do something. But again, like, if you go to the SQL editor, Supabase has a collection of helpful little snippets. So if you're not super familiar with SQL, but you know that you need to, let's say just create a table. If I click this, it just pre-fills what I need to do to create a table. And then hopefully you can just kind of read over this and pass what's going on and then say, actually, I also need a description, and that description is going to be of type text. And so, hopefully, again, like, rather than just saying, click this button to create a table, we have that option. If you want to go to the table editor, you can click this button to create a table. But if you want to learn SQL, you can also click this button to see what the SQL syntax for that is. All right, we're getting too distracted with Supabase things. We need to get to the Next.js stuff. Lee must be screaming in the comments. He must be on his 6th or 7th coffee at this point. All right, I'll come back to the comments in a little bit. And yeah, see what's going on. And yeah, someone's asking if there are examples of all of these things, and like how to write Postgres functions and things. Tarek is saying that there are videos that I made that are in the Supabase channel. So I recommend you go over to youtube.com/Supabase and check out these videos. I actually did a whole playlist on, if I can find them, there was a whole playlist on Postgres functions, which go really deep into all of this side of things. There's a really good one on RLS, which I think people still find very helpful in learning RLS. But yes, all right, Next.js 13. That's what we're doing. If my voice holds up. So we have, now we have this create client function. So we want to use it. So maybe I'll just create like, I guess like the kind of 3 different models of data fetching that people have, hopefully in their mind, is doing everything client side. So connecting to something client side and fetching data and doing like using something like use effect and use state. So I can actually sketch it out here. So if we have a route for just like /client side, and that can go to, that can use everything client side. So it can use effect, it can use state, and use the Supabase JS library to go and fetch data. We can have /SSR, SSR. And so this is where you are fetching that data on every single request. So this is server-side rendering. This is, so in the, I don't want to say old world, it's not the old world, in the still current world, using Next.js in the pages directory, this would be like exporting out a get server-side props function. And so this is something that we will do. So we'll create an SSR route that can go and fetch data, but basically this will fetch the data on every single request. The last one is SSG. I don't know, I don't like all these acronyms, but let's say, well, yeah, how about we say server rendered and then static generation. All right. So using client side, this would be using use effect. Server rendered would be using get server side props. Static generation would be using get static props. And so this is where you go and fetch that data once at build time, and then you never fetch it again. So that the static HTML is generated with those values baked into it, and then that is never fetched again. Let's then say, well, what if I do want to update that? GitHub Copilot almost got it. Let's go static with revalidation. Can it do it? Almost. With revalidate prop. Right. So yeah, client side using use effect, go and do everything client side. Server rendered happens on every single request. So anytime any user goes to your page, you're going and fetching that data again. Static generation, this only happens at build time and only happens once. So when you build your whole site, this happens once and then never again. But it is super, super fast because all of those assets have already been created for you. And then we've got static with revalidation. And so that's not how you spell revalidation. Static with revalidation is where, so this is using something like incremental static regeneration, ISR, which is something that you might be familiar with Next.js 12 and before apps, where you're using get static props. And so it's doing a static generation at build time. It's creating all of the static pages for anything that exports a get static props function. But then it does a special extra thing and allows you to give it a revalidate prop. And so you can tell it basically when you want it to revalidate or for how long to consider that data to be fresh. So you could do a build of your entire application, and then you could say, I want this to be considered fresh for 60 seconds, so 1 minute. But after that point, I want to go and revalidate with fresh data. So I only want this data to be stale, or I only want this data to be considered fresh for 60 seconds. And so, yeah, that's the other kind of model of data fetching. Which one should we use for the best SEO results? I would say like static generation is going to give you the best SEO results because it's like it's all already there. It just loads. It loads the data straight away. Because it's already fetched the data from the database. So there is no connection to the database at request time. So when the Google bots come and scrape your website or index your website, it's just, it asks for the page and it gets the HTML page that has already been generated with that data. But the problem is that might mean that your SEO, like the results in the search engine are out of date because it doesn't actually map to your database. So static with revalidation means that as long as people are like actively using your site, these pages are going to be rebuilt when after a minute or after a day or whatever you set your revalidate prop to. And so every time Google comes to crawl your site, then obviously it would get the latest data. I guess like the real answer is that the one that is the worst for SEO results is client side. And so Google does index your, they say that they run the JavaScript and wait for that data to resolve, but then they're very cagey about how much time they would wait for that. And so, yeah, client side is probably the worst one for SEO. Not that it means that it's like that bad, but you're better off doing either server rendered or statically generated stuff for SEO purposes. But yeah, like it depends. It all depends. It always depends. But let's build this. So let's just like create the ones with these names. Yeah, let's start with client side. Why not? All right. So let's say we're going to instead call this client side.tsx. And then in here, we're going to import use effect. And we are also going to import use state. And then in here, we can say const data and set data equal to use state null. And then we need a use effect. Oh, that's pretty close. Not quite. Oh no, I'm letting it get out of hand. We do not want to use fetch. We want to use our Supabase client. And so we can import Supabase from our utils file. And then we can say supabase.from, and then we tell it which table we want to select from. So the table that I think we had was parks. And then we want to tell it what we want to select. And so we can either select all of the columns, so star would be all, or even I think just leaving nothing there selects all of the columns. But if you're a fan of not overfetching and things like GraphQL and things like Prisma allows you to specify which columns you'd like to get back. So if you only want to get back the ID and the title of your park, if you don't actually care about the date that it was created at, for example, then you can specify that there. But let's just select all the columns. So we can demonstrate what we get back. So this is an asynchronous function. So this is kind of I don't know, the thing that frustrates me are these like cascading things that you need to implement if you're using this client side. So we need a place to store it, and we need it to like to refresh our page when we have new data. And so we need like a reactive live thing that we can use to cause React to re-render. So we need to use useState to give us a variable and a set data function to be able to do that. But then we need to go and fetch it when our page mounts. So definitely something we should have done here is pass that empty dependency array, so we're not doing that constantly. But yeah, so when our component mounts, the first time it's rendered on the page, in the browser. So once it's hydrated on the browser, we call useEffect, and then this is going off to Supabase. But this .from function, or which bit's going to tell me? This gives us back, something gives us back a promise. So this is an asynchronous thing. So then we can't just do an async function here for useEffect, because that is against the rules of useEffect. It needs to return a function that can do cleanup, not a promise. So we need to declare a new function called getData, and this can be an async function. And then in there, we can do this stuff, which means we can now await, because it's an async function. And then we can get what we actually get back from Supabase. So let's say we want to get our data and our error. And then let's just console log this out just in case. And then we want to call setData, which is our function up here, and we want to pass it in our data. This will work because of scoping and things, but if it upsets you that this is called data and this is called data, then we could like rename this to Supabase data and pass that into set data. I reckon I'm happy with this one. This is saying you're trying to put something on something that is only meant to be null because we haven't done any typing. And so we can go and get these types from Supabase. But again, we won't spend time on that right now, because I think it's more valuable to look at the Next.js side of things. But check out previous Happy Hour streams for how to go and get those types and pass them in. But here I'm just gonna use the so against the rules, but we're just going to use any. So we're just saying that data can be of type any. But we're doing it explicitly, so TypeScript is happy, because we're opting into saying we know we're doing the wrong thing, but we're going to do the wrong thing for the briefness of teaching this. I'm going to have another sip of coffee. All right. So then the last thing we need to do, the reason this is gray is because we haven't actually called it. So let's call getData. And then this data is gray because we're not actually using it. So now here down in our component, instead of being an about page, actually we can just get rid of all of this, and we're going to probably just kind of reuse this pattern over and over again, where we're going to call JSON.stringify, pass it our data object, and then we're going to pass it null and 2, which just allows us to pretty print that data. And that should be it. So now if we come across to our page, we no longer have about, but we have client-side. And you'll see that that was null, and then it's an empty object. And this is because we don't have any data yet. So our parks are empty. We don't have any results. So let's create a new park called like Shady Happy Land is going to be our new park. And not Slim Shady. Eminem won't be rapping there, but it's going to be nice and shady and protect us from the sun. So let's refresh this page, and now you'll see we got null for a second there, and then we got this array of our parks that are coming back. So we see that flash of null, which isn't great, and that's because we've got this loading state. So we also need to implement that loading state. Look at that. It already knows what we're going to do. Loading, set loading. We're going to set it to true initially because the first thing we do is we go and fetch this data. So it's loading initially. But then once we get the data back, once we're no longer loading, we can set loading to be false. And then down here, we can say if we are loading, then we want to render out something. Otherwise, we want to render out this. So if we're loading, we just want to render out a p tag that says loading. And now, back in our component, if we refresh, we see loading flash for a second, and then we see our data. And so, yeah, this is probably something you are used to seeing with client-side stuff, that we get the page immediately, but then we just get a loading spinner, and we have to go and fetch that data that is the actual data that we want to see, and then it pops in. So yeah, so this is how we do it client-side, but there's like a whole bunch of, sorry, I'll just rename this. There's a whole bunch of like loading states and going and fetching data and unnecessary stuff in here. So if we were to, because the way that Next.js works is the first render of our application is on the server. And so this first render that we see with that loading flash, that's actually happening on the server. So the server is executing this code, and then it is determining that, oh, yes, we need to show loading because loading, the first state of loading is true. So therefore, we need to show this. So it will send that down. And then once it's hydrated on the client, which is just where it like runs the JavaScript and attaches the event handlers and does all the interactive-y stuff, that's when useEffect gets called. And then it will go and fetch this data. And then once we have the data back, it will say we're no longer loading and we've got our data. So here is our data. But this first render where we see loading, that's happening on the server. So wouldn't it be great if we could already have this data and pass it through to our component so that on the first render, it doesn't need to display a loading spinner. It can just display our data. So we are going to create a new file called server rendered. So this will be server rendered.tsx. And in here, we are going to export our default function for SSR. And here we are just going to return as SSR. And then over in our page, we can navigate to SSR. Oops, there we go. We can navigate to server rendered. It's the name of our route. And we see the text SSR. Cool. So this is working, but we don't have any data. So how do we fetch data? In the pages directory, you are probably familiar with this if you're watching this and hoping that we will get to the app directory and all of the new fetching and data stuff, which we will. We totally will. There's 40 minutes left. We got lots of time. So not previous world, the pages directory, we can use get server side props. We can export this function out. So we say export const to get server side props. Or if it upsets you that we're using two different styles of function declaration, we can say export function get server side props. This one can be an async function, so we can say async. So this gets rid of that whole useEffect not being able to be async nonsense. So we can make it a little bit more succinct already. So then we want to say, we want to copy that same thing over. So we want to go and get our data from Supabase. And then from get server-side props, we return an object with the key props. And in there, we can return our data that we get back from Supabase. Yeah, we could, let's not worry about errors right now. Because, yeah, everything I do will work first time. So we don't need errors. Cool. No, you should always handle errors properly. But in the trying to get to the app directory, we will not worry about them for now. So we're getting back our data from calling parks, and then we're passing that through. So then this, we can destructure the data that we get back from here. And then again, we can just dump it out in the same way that we are here in a pre-tag. And paste that here. And then we should be using this. Implicitly has any. Yeah, it does. I'm sorry, TypeScript. I should have just not done TypeScript, shouldn't I? That was a silly idea. Because that's going to be any. I'm sorry, all the TypeScript people. Again, we can, maybe if we have time, I'll actually go and generate the types for Supabase and attach them, because it's very easy to do. Should we do it right now? Let's do it if we have time. I want to get to this other stuff, but it's very easy to do. So I will show you at the end of this. All right, we go and get our data. We pass it through as props. We then can destructure those directly from the props that our component gets, and then we can print them out on the screen. So now if we have a look at our server rendered thing, if we refresh, we don't see anything, and then we see our data. So this is a much nicer experience if we don't have to wait a really, really long time. So if, for example, if I simulated this taking a really long time, so this is how you create a new promise, and when we call that resolve function, it will resolve the promise. So then we could call set time out. GitHub Copilot, yes. All right, and we can just say true. So this gives us back a promise and set timeout for a second. So let's set this to like 3 seconds. So we're waiting 3 seconds, and then we're calling resolve, which will resolve this promise, which means if we, we can just await it. We don't actually care about the value that's coming back because it's just true. But here we can await that, which just basically means we're waiting 3 seconds, and then we're making this request to Supabase. So if we were to refresh this page, we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting, and then the data pops in. So this might not be a very great experience because you're not giving any kind of loading feedback. You're not giving a loading spinner or something like that. So we'll look at how we can use suspense and some of the other awesome stuff Next.js 13 is giving us in that app directory once we get to it. But yeah, one thing that is a problem here is if that data takes a really, really long time to fetch, then we're not giving the user any feedback. And so since this is the same call every single time, and it doesn't actually matter who our user is or anything like that, we're just going and selecting this big bunch of data, we could actually make this page entirely static. And so we could then create our static page. Actually, just before we do that, let's just reflect on the fact that this doesn't actually matter. This doesn't comparable to the other one, but this is comparable to the other one, where we're going and fetching some data from Supabase, and then we're rendering it out on the page. But if we have a look at this component, which is only 15 lines, versus this client-side component, which is 24 lines, like there's a lot of like loading logic that we need to handle here. There's, client-side state and all of these things. But on the server rendered one, this is very, very clean, right? We're just going and getting that data, and then we're passing it through as props, and much, much cleaner way. We don't need to worry about that handling that loading state, because we're not first rendering it on the server with no data and then going and fetching that data client side. We're fetching that data on the server as it's rendering our component, or before it renders our component, and then we're giving the browser a fully rendered version of this page that already has the data injected into it. So yeah, we don't need to worry about handling any of those loading or error states, really, because we could handle our errors here. But yeah, we would need to make sure that we're passing through the error as a prop so that we could then handle it here. But let's have a look at what this looks like if we statically generate it, because we're fetching the same thing over and over and over again. And let's say that this isn't changing very frequently, so we always have the same parks there. Let's look at how we would run this function once at build time, and then just have that static HTML that we can just serve up immediately. So enter the static generation page. And I'm going to dump this out. Nope, not that one. I'm just going to copy all of this because it will be very similar. This will just need to be, I don't know, SSG. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, like literally all we need to change is rather than being get server side props, this now becomes get static. Woo! Not like that. It becomes get static props. The API is exactly the same. So we go and get that data, we pass it through, and then we render it in our component. So by just changing that one word, we now have a statically generated page. So if we have a look here, if we go to static generation, we'll see that we actually are still waiting for that, right? So that's a little bit weird, isn't it? That every time we refresh, we are waiting that amount of time. And if I go and grab this thing from my other file and we wait 3 seconds before we do that, if we refresh, we actually are still just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then it pops in. And if we refresh again, it's not there. We're still waiting and waiting. Why are we waiting that 3 seconds if that only runs once at build time? And that's because we're running in development mode. So when we're running npm run dev, if I can spell it, this is running a development server, which behind the scenes, just to optimize things for development, the get static props function will get called every single time we refresh that page. But to simulate what this would actually be like in production, we can just run a build. And so npm run build will build a let's just do it as 2 separate steps. So npm run build will build a production version of our application. So this is what will happen if we deploy to Vercel or something like that. It will go, and every single time we push a new commit or merge it into main on GitHub, it goes and generates a new version of our application. And now if we run npm run start, this is going to start it's basically going to serve that built directory locally. So rather than running a development server, we're now running like a production server. And you'll notice now, if we refresh this page, well, that's it. It's already done. Weird. Like, look, I refresh it. It's instant. And that's because this is now here. I'm even doing Command Shift R, doing that like hard refresh. This is never going to update or change because we've done that once when we built the page. So when we ran npm run build, we went and built a new version of our application, and it's detected that we're only using static generation for this page. And so it's automatically generated the static HTML and JSON. So there's nothing to go and fetch. We're not doing a live request, but just something to call out that, like, when you're running in development mode, it doesn't act like that. So you might get very confused as to what's going on because you think it should only be doing it once. But that's because, development mode works like that. If we want to simulate what it's actually like in production, we can run npm run build and then npm run start. So we now have a static page. Whoops, this one. So I refresh, it's always going to be that. So now what happens when I go and insert a new row that says sunny playground? I now have 2 rows in my database. I have shady happy land and I have sunny playground. But if I go to my application, which is built and running as it would in production, so as it would if it was hosted from Vercel or whatever, if I refresh, no matter how many times I refresh, we're never going to get that new value. Because when we built a new version of our application, there was only one record in the database. And now when I add a new record in the database, Next.js doesn't know that. It doesn't know that it needs to go and build another version of our application. And so I just never get that value. So how do we fix this? We fix this with what I called out earlier as our 4th method, which is static with revalidation. So this takes a revalidate prob and allows us to specify how long we want to consider that data fresh. So I'm going to copy this so I don't have to spell it. And then we are going to take our statically. All right. I'm going to copy and paste this one. Then I'm going to go and get all of ours. Wait, no, it's already there. What am I talking about? All right. Get rid of copy. Static regeneration. Static with revalidation. And then I'm going to copy that route. So now we have a static with revalidation component. So this is now a route in our pages directory. So here we could say, we'll call this SSG revalidate. And all that needs to change in this is that we pass it, we return from getStaticProps an object that has props, but it also has a revalidate key. And we're going to set that to 10 just so that we can see it quickly. So this is 10 seconds. So when we run a build, Next.js is going to go call this getStaticProps function, and it's going to go and make a request to Supabase, and then it's going to prepare that data. It's going to pass it through to our component. It's going to render this on the server, and it's going to give that as the static version of this HTML. But then everyone that refreshes the page for 10 seconds is going to see the old version, the version that was that happened when we built a new version of our application. But after 10 seconds, the next person that refreshes still gets that old version, but then it kicks off the process in the background to go and call this function again, this getStaticProps function again, and rebuild a new version of our page. And then that is considered fresh for 10 seconds. And then after 10 seconds, the next person that refreshes the page causes that process to happen again and again. So, well, firstly, let's get rid of this because we don't actually need it. And we'll also get rid of it from here. And now our revalidate is happening every 10 seconds. So let's go and build a new version of our application. So here we can say, we can actually run them, like run one process and then the other. And so we can run npm run build, and then when that is finished and succeeds, we can then run npm run start. And it's just a way that we don't need to do those as two separate steps. So now it's gone and it's said, okay, this 404 page is static. This client side one is static. As in there's no props, there's no anything that changes on it. Our server rendered page is a server, so this needs to run a function when someone refreshes the page. But then static generation and static with revalidation are both SSG. And so, or one's SSG and one's ISR, so incremental static regeneration. So we have now built a new version of our entire application. So if we go and check that out here, we have static generation, and we now get that new value in our Supabase database. But now each time we refresh, we're getting that instantly, and it's never going and revalidating. If we say static with revalidation, we also see exactly the same thing, and we refresh a bunch of times. We're always going to get that static value, that static page for this. But the difference is, if we go and create a partially shady playground, we go and create this in the database. If we go to static generation, and if we keep refreshing that, we're never going to get a new value. But if we go to static with revalidation, I've just refreshed now, and it's been 10 seconds since we have built the original version of our application. So that's now kicked off a process to call getStaticProps again and rebuild this page. So now when I refresh, I see that value. So the longest that something is going to stay stale is 10 seconds plus however long it takes to actually go and call getStaticProps. But this is a way that we can keep our pages fairly dynamic as the data in our database is changing and giving us new dynamic values. But we still get all those benefits of the statically generated stuff. So really good for SEO, really good for giving people the data straight away. But we also, like, we now have this nice little compromise where every 10 seconds we can go and revalidate and get new data from our Supabase database. But as you can see, like when I refresh, I'm like refreshing constantly, and it's instantly giving me that static value. And then even when we go and add a new value here, so the fun playground, I go and add this new value, I can go and refresh. It popped in pretty quickly. But like I can keep refreshing and still getting that stale value while it's going and fetching that data. And only once that data is ready and we've generated a new version of our page do we serve up the static version of that. So people are always getting that super fast thing. So we've now spent an hour and 35 minutes talking about Next.js 12 and everything that was available in Next.js 12 without going into Next.js 13 at all, in terms of the app directory. So let's jump into that. So how do we like refactor these ideas and look at the new ways that we do it in Next.js 13? So let's start by let's create a new folder in our pages directory, and let's call this in Next.js 12. And let's move all of these ones in here. And yeah, sure. Let's update all of those. No, didn't update all of them, just the one. I swear it never works. Anytime I click yes, it just doesn't actually update the imports at all. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what that actually means. Cool. So the reason that I did this is because if we go and create like client-side.tsx in the app directory, then there will be a conflicting name for that page. And so I've just made this 12. In fact, maybe I'll make a folder in here called 13. And inside, well, yeah, I'll create a folder called 13. And then let's just move this client-side one up to 13. And let's have a look at how this differs. So we can go back to just running a development server until we need to test that static stuff again. Cool. So now, I mean, if I refresh this, I'll get a 404 because that page doesn't exist anymore. But if we go to /13/client side, we get a 404. And this might be, if we have a look at the, no error there. 13 client side. Let's check if 12 client side works. I don't think it should, but I feel like we should get an error. So this one we get loading and then we see the page. 13, we don't get anything. We get a 404 trying to get 13 client side. Anyway, what I wanted to demonstrate is that when you're using these like use state and use effect and these like client side things, we no longer want this to be a server component. And so, as I mentioned at the start of this stream, anything in the app directory is automatically a React server component. And so this is a component that runs on the server, and then basically it's doing something similar to like this server rendered one. It's basically like calling get server side props on the server. You can go and do that server stuff. You can pass it into the component and then send it through to the client. But it all happens on the server. So there isn't really like this using all of these client side APIs. It's trying to do this on the server and going, what are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. And so if you're using any of these client side APIs like use effect or use state, then you need to, I believe it's use client. You need to add this to the top that is flagging this to Next.js to say, don't try and render this as a server component because it doesn't make sense as a server component because we have all of this client side stuff going on. Go and run this in the client and just tell the server not to worry about it. So now, if we refresh this, we still see nothing. What have I broken? Oh god. Let's try running npm run dev again, just in case. And if anyone in the chat sees my glaring mistake, let me know. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. You're on it. You're all on it. You need to use page.tsx. I certainly do. So what I want to do is I want to create a folder called client side. So let's say, folder called client side. And in there, I want this component to be in there Oh, yeah, sure. Update it. Oh, it did. Look, it worked that time. But I want to rename this one. Instead of being client-side, I want to call it page.tsx. And so this is a convention from Next.js to say that anything that is the component that should be rendered out on the page needs to be called page.tsx. And so you must have a page.tsx. But then you can optionally have a layout.tsx. And so this is something that's going to wrap everything that's inside that version 13 one. So actually, it might be a good idea to create like a layout that wraps around this 13 one to say, hey, you're using experimental Next.js 13 app directory things. So we can see that on the page, but let's not worry about that for now. We now have this page. So now, actually, if I get rid of this use client thing that I was talking about before, now if I come over here, this is the error that I was expecting to see. So you are importing a component that uses use state, that needs use state. It only works as a client component, but none of its parents are marked as use client. So they are server components by default. So this is what I was trying to explain before, is that by default, Next.js 13 will treat anything in the app directory as a server component. So if you want to say this isn't a server component, you need to actively mark it as a client component. And you do that by saying use client. Oh, yeah, we can do it. There we go. So by putting this this statement at the top, you're saying this is a client component. Only render this on the client. And now, if we go back to our browser and refresh, we can see that we're getting hello because that's coming from our layout thing. So that's actually a good idea. Let's up here in our layout.tsx, rather than saying hello, we could have a yeah, let's just quickly create like a warning state that has background as red, and padding 2 rem. And then in our layout, we are only importing that. So we want to import styles from our page.module.css. This is probably breaking all kinds of naming conventions, given that these are now styles for our layout, not our page, but ignore it, Lee. It's okay, Lee. All right. So rather than hello, we're going to have a, we can have a div with a class name of styles dot, I call it warning. And we'd call it warning. We're going to say text align center. And we're going to save this one. And so now on our page, we see this big hello warning error banner. And so up here, we could say using experimental app directory. Now we can see that this is using the experimental app directory. But if we go to like our version 12 version of this, we're just using this totally stable Next.js 12 version of all of these data fetching things. So now we can very clearly see what we're doing. And also it's black. It's nice and dark mode, except I'm kind of ruining that by shouting this in your face. But cool. So yeah, what I was trying to show is that this just works by default. Nothing needs to change here. We can still use use effect. We can still use use state. We don't need to change anything about how we're handling entirely client-side things. One thing that the React team is working on that has been exposed as part of Next.js 13 is this wonderful new use hook. And so rather than saying use effect and use state, actually I might just create a separate component. So let's copy and paste, and that didn't work. Why it no work? There we go. So client side with use, just something I wanted to call out. Maybe Lee can help me out with this, but when I tried to use, and then the cool thing about using this use hook is that we can get rid of a lot of this stuff. So it will be a client component, but it will act more like a server component that has all of this wonderful suspense stuff happening. And I guess we haven't looked at that. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll look at it in a second. But we can treat it more like an asynchronous server rendered component. So we can create a get data function. We can have get data, which is an async function. And in here, we can move our call to Supabase. And then I think we can just return data. And then here, rather than having any of this stuff, we can say const data equals use get data, but we need to call that as a function. And then this will magically do all of the async stuff for us. So we no longer have a loading state. And so this cleans this right up and makes it look similar to our other like server fetching stuff that looks really clean from Next.js 12. We don't need to handle a loading state. We can handle an error state separately. We just have this use function, and this use function just magically does promisey stuff. And it will, when it hits this point, it will actually suspend, and it will wait for this data function to be called. And then when we get our data back, that's when it will render this component. So theoretically, that's how it works. What I've found is if I try and use client side with use, and I go to my network, you'll see that we're flying through a whole bunch of requests and probably DDoSing Supabase right now. So I'm just going to get rid of this again. So what I've found is, I don't know if it's just running in development mode. I haven't tried to build it as a production app and see whether that happens as well. But I've noticed that using use in the client, which I think is exactly the same as the example in the documentation. If we have a look at data fetching, or server and client components, this is where we talk about our new use thingo. So we have all of this data fetching stuff, our server only stuff that we'll talk about in a second. And all right, let's say use. No, that's not there. Maybe it was up there. Sorry, I didn't want to cough into the mic and deafen all of you. Hopefully my throat holds up. All right. If we come back up to fetching, and then we search for use, yes, we have this new use hook. So I believe what I've written out here is exactly the same as this. So we have this get data function. It is using fetch rather than sorry, we're using Supabase JS rather than fetch, so it might be something to do with that. And so yeah, we're calling use, we're passing it that function. It goes and calls that function, which is an async function, and then continues to render our component. And it says that this is accepts a promise and conceptually similar to await, but it just will magically suspend at that point and then just continue on when we have our data. So yeah, Lee, if you're still around, I don't know if this is just because here we're using the Supabase JS client instead of using fetch natively. But actually, I think I ran into the same problem with fetch using that directly as well. Yeah, I'm not going to go into it right now because it gets a little bit messy. But yeah, just a shout out that use I think is like very experimental. So It's conceptually, it is an awesome like hook to give us in the browser. I think this is going to like massively simplify things. It's going to get rid of all that loading state stuff. But yeah, right now I've just noticed that it doesn't. It seems to just kick me into an infinite loop. And I think I've got the syntax the same as this, like no await in front of use. This is an async function. This is an async function. It's called get data. So yeah, something we can look at separately. All right, cool. So we've got our client side one. So if we come back to this one and we've just got client side, if we refresh, we get our loading state and then we see our data. So let's move this across to the back end and let's do this properly on the server. So this is basically Next.js is recommending that anything like any data fetching stuff that we can do server side, we should do server side. So Next.js kind of dissuades us a little bit from doing our client side stuff. I've got a copy of this. All right. So it kind of dissuades us from doing things like this. And I think that's why we're getting this new use hook, because that is more in line with the future of React and treats client components the same as server components, so they can also suspend and wait for data to come back. Actually, I wonder if I'm just getting an error anyway, I'll look at that separately. So what Next.js suggests we do is do everything on the server that we can. So why don't we copy across this server rendered one, and we'll have to do our little dance with creating a folder called this, then moving this one in here, and then calling this one page.tsx. We no longer have this get server-side props function. So we can just comment this out for a second, just so we've still got it there and we can reference back to it if we want. Let's copy that and uncomment it and just modify it to do what we want. So now we don't need to export anything. So we're not exporting this out to tell Next.js that there's something there that we want to run on the server. This function can be called whatever we want, but we're just going to call it get data because that's conceptually what we're doing. We're just going and getting some data. And this async function goes and gets the data from Supabase. But then we can just return the data directly instead of returning that like props object, which means we don't actually get it passed in like this. The way that we get it is this is like the coolest thing. This is the thing that just blew my mind about server components, and like I don't know if it's Next.js's implementation or whether it's React's implementation, but whatever is going on here is awesome. We can now just export our async functions, and so we can deal with async stuff just in our component directly. And so because we now have this async function, we're not going to get yelled at when we say, hey, we want to grab the data from awaiting a call to get data. And so this get data function is an async function, but we don't need to use effect, and we don't need to like export out a specific function for Next.js that Next.js is going to detect and run on the server. We don't need to worry about any of that stuff. We can now just have an asynchronous component that runs on the server and is just going to go and fetch our data and give it to us. And that's it. That's how simple it is. So now if I get rid of all of this stuff, we now just have this get data function. It can wait for it to go and get the data and then give us our data. Let's see if I actually lied. Let's go and go to /server rendered. And there it is. There's our data. One thing to check is whether I actually have lied. So if we come across to here and let's quit our server, let's run it like we're running in production. So let's run npm run build and then npm run start. And then we'll come across here, we'll refresh. Awesome, that's all working. We've got our data. But now if we go and add a new row to this record, so let's say brand new playground. By the way, this is where someone in the chat says, hey, John, your mic is muted. You haven't actually said anything this entire time. Can you please turn your mic on? And I realize that all of this forcing this croaky voice to explain everything that has changed in the last 2 weeks, it's all lost. All right, so we've got this server rendered thing. We've added a new one, which is brand new playground. So let's refresh and get our brand new playground. Wait, where is our brand new playground? Why isn't it there? Didn't we go and update the database? Isn't this running on the server and blah, 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 blah? Yes, it is. But by default, Next.js runs this function once and then statically caches it. So this version of it, where we don't do anything else, this is actually the same as our static generation version. So if let's rename this one static. Actually, all right, let's copy and paste that so we don't have to rewrite it all again. And let's say this one is our static generation. Yes, that's right. So if we, basically if we refresh, no matter how many times we refresh, we're never going to get that new value, because by default, if we don't tell Next.js anything else, then it's going to go call this function once, and then it is going to cache it as if it is a static value. And so the way that we tell it that we don't want it to cache it is by exporting out some little config helpers. So this is a good time to shout out that if you're using fetch directly, then you would do this in a different way. So if we come up here and we have a look at data fetching, Next.js or Vercel, I guess, have worked with the React people, or I guess not the React people. They have modified fetch to be able to pass it these additional configs that are specific to Next.js. So you can call the global fetch inside your component like this. You can just say fetch, but you can pass it an additional cache prop, or you can pass it a next and revalidate prop, and you can change the way that this caching works. But we're not, well, Supabase is using the native fetch like under the hood, but we're using Supabase JS in front of that. And so you as a consumer are not using fetch directly. And so you can't pass through these additional config options. And so very intelligently and wonderfully, if that's a word, Next.js have given us these segment config options. And so these are different options that we can specify. We can export out of our component to basically control how all of that caching stuff works. And so this mentions that, does it mention? It might mention auto is the default option. And this default option is to cache as much as possible without preventing any components from opting into dynamic behavior. So by default, if we don't export out anything, then we are going to basically get this heavily cached version. And so that is the same as our statically, like that's the same as calling get static props and not telling it anything else. So it will never revalidate this ever. And then if we want to actually revalidate that, what this says is that we can export out this dynamic thing, and then rather than setting it to auto, we can set it to force dynamic. And so this is what I expected would force it to do SSR, but I wasn't able to get it to work. So let's export out this, and let's just quickly go through how it might work in the future, but how I don't think it works yet. So if we have our server rendered page, we just export out this const dynamic, and then we can set this to force dynamic. And then if we were to rebuild a new version of our application and run that production version, we will see, if I refresh our server rendered page, we see our brand new playground. But then if I go and create another new one, this is just going to get ridiculous with my lack of creative names for these wonderful playgrounds. But if we have another new one, and then we come back to our application, we would expect when we refresh that because this is forcing dynamic, that would mean that it goes and fetches it every single time. And if we have a look at the documentation, that's what it kind of implies. Force dynamic rendering and dynamic data fetching of a layout or page by disabling all caching of fetch requests. So this is the thing, is I think it's because it's specifically fetch requests. Yeah, so it's similar to saying cache no store and setting next revalidate to 0. So I couldn't get this part to work, but there are other options that we can export out, like revalidate. So this is how we control that revalidation way of doing things. If we want to do something similar to incremental static regeneration, we can export out a revalidate variable and set it to a number of time that we're happy for this page to be considered fresh. So we can use a little sneaky and say, well, what if we just want to revalidate to 0? So we only want to consider this fresh for 0 seconds. This essentially forces it to do server rendered stuff. So every single time it will go and revalidate data. And so now if we run this and come across to our page and we refresh, we'll see that new value. And then if we come here and say this one now appears, and we save, as soon as this is in the database, if we go and refresh this page, we see it there. So every single time we refresh the page, it's going and fetching that data. So right now, this is how you do it to work with Supabase and Next.js 13. I don't know if it's just Supabase. It's probably Prisma and anything else that's not using fetch directly, like you as the consumer are not writing just a fetch statement. But yeah, I suspect in the future that the correct way to do this would be to export out a export const dynamic and set it to force dynamic. But yeah, for now, haven't been able to get it to work that way. So setting revalidate to 0 seems to work perfectly, which might hint to you how we are going to implement our special regeneration one. So if we, not caught. Let's just copy this one, paste it into here, and we will call this static with revalidation. I think that's what we called the other one. Let's have a look. Static with revalidation. Awesome. So if we have static with revalidation, we just need to export out how long we would like it to be considered fresh. So again, if we leave it, it's 100% static. It's always going to be static. It's never going to go and get those new results. If we export out revalidate 0, then it's going to be server rendered and it's always going to fetch that new data on every single request. But if we export out a revalidate prop set to 10, for example, then this is going to be the same as our static with revalidation version here, where we have get static props and we're setting revalidate to 10. We can now rebuild a version of our application. We're running a little bit over. This is the last little bit, I promise. Okay, cool. So now, actually, does this even tell us what everything is rendered out as? Yeah, cool. So it actually picks up that server rendered. Oh no, that's 12. What am I talking about? It doesn't tell us for 13. Oh, no, it does. Okay. So client side with the use, server rendered. So it does detect that setting revalidate to 0 is telling it to always render, like always make that request on always go and fetch data on every single request. But it's interesting that static generation, and static with revalidation is saying that it's saying that it's static. Okay, ignore everything I'm saying. So now when we come across to here and we go to server rendered, so if we refresh, we're going to get those fresh values on every single refresh. If we go to static with revalidation, we're going to see this one now appears. And then if we go and add another one and say mic drop, then if we refresh this page, we shouldn't see it. But now it's kicked off that process in the background. If we refresh again, then we see mic drop. And so this is similar to that get static props passing a revalidate option or what is known as incremental static regeneration. This is how you would emulate something like that. So, to recap, actually, one more thing that is shouted out in the documentation that I should do is using a server-only package. So if we go to server, it tells us that everything is a server component in the app directory. It tells us how to do a client component by exporting out or by mentioning that, putting this statement at the top. But then we do have how to make it a somewhere here there will be server only. So yeah, this basically explains the problem we're talking about here. But basically, this server only code is still going to make its way into the client bundle. So get data here. It looks like it's just running on the server, and that's how it's working when we refresh our page. But that data is still, or that code is still potentially getting included in our client bundle. So the way we fix that is we install server only, which is a tiny package that I believe Vercel have written for this exact purpose. So if we install server only, then I mean we can run either, but let's run it. Actually, yeah, let's just add it first. So we've installed server only, and then anything that we only want to run on the server, we just import this server only directive or whatever. And yeah, we just put it in anything that should run on the server. So that's our server rendered one. This one runs on the server. And we only need to import it. We don't need to actually do anything with it. By importing it at the top, that just tells Next.js that this is something that we only want to run on the server, so don't include it in the client bundle. And then this one as well, we can say, actually, we should put it before our imports or our top import, just so it's really clear that this one is a server-only component. And then in this one as well. All right. And that's it. Now, if we npm run build and npm run start, it's not going to change anything from our perspective from what we just saw. Like, it's going to be exactly the same across all of those pages. But that's just the recommended way that we do it, so that none of that bundle poisoning happens, where things that shouldn't be in that client bundle end up in the client bundle. All right. And that, I think, concludes everything that I know about Next.js 13 and everything that I have been playing with over the last couple of weeks. So let me know what you think. Add a comment to the video. Let us know in the comments if you found this useful. Next week, we are going to go through like a similar thing, but using the brand new Remix auth helpers. So I'm going to take you through all of the work that Thor and I have been doing there, building out these auth helpers to make server-side stuff a little bit easier with Remix and Supabase. So join me for that one. As I shouted out at the start, make sure you head on over to youtube.com/Supabase. Super easy, super convenient URL of just /Supabase, and hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to find out when we're going live with things like this, but also whenever we are putting out other videos and other pieces of content. I recommend you go and check out the Supabase blog for a whole bunch of awesome new kind of like technical themed blogs that we're really focusing on at the moment. If you want sick memes, go and check out twitter.com/Supabase for fantastic memes. Let's see what the first one is. No, that's just me talking. All right, throwing my hands in the air. Oh, they're letting us down. Need to get on that meme team and tell them they need to put out something hilarious. But there we go. So different versions of if statements. We've got if, else, if, else, if, else, plugging all those in together. We've got a switch. We've got while true. We've got for each. And we've got try catch. It's hilarious. They're, yeah, highly recommend you follow it just for the memes. But also, we have the Supabase launch week coming soon. I don't know if we've announced the exact date yet. I know the date, but I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you the date. But there is a launch week happening sometime soonish. And so following us on Twitter is probably the best place that you can hear about all of the exciting things that we're launching, and stay on top of all of that stuff. The other thing you should do is, if I scroll back up to the top here, if you go to discord.supabase.com, that will redirect you to this wonderful invite for our Discord server, which you can see there are 9,846 other people that are excited about Supabase and talking about the things that they're building. So I highly recommend you go and check that out. If you like my very sick sounding voice at the moment, that hopefully won't sound sick in all of the other content that I create, you should come and follow me at johnmyers_io on Twitter. And yeah, come let me know what you're building. I would be very excited to hear it. And I think that is it. So thank you so much for joining me for Happy Hour, Supabase Happy Hour number 26, and learning all about data fetching and caching with Next.js. And I will see you again next week. Thanks. See ya.